If you've been avoiding sends because you don't understand how to use them or indeed what they're for, then I'm going to save your life with this video about inserts versus sends. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. A number of people have asked me to explain the difference between inserts and sends. And if you've only been using inserts up until now because you've been confused about sends, I hope that by the end of this video, it will be absolutely clear to you, and then you'll be able to make the right choices about when to use either of these methods. Let's get started by taking a look at inserts. So I know that most of you are familiar with using plugins as inserts, but let's just have a quick look at what's actually happening in the channel when we do that. I've got a channel set up here with a virtual guitar sound. Let's have a quick listen. Lovely, I'm sure. Now, it's important to understand that the signal works from top to the bottom as far as the channel's concerned. So it starts off at the top, and the first thing it's affected by is the gain control right at the top. And that can be used to make the signal either quieter or louder. So quieter like so, and then louder. So that's important because it controls the level at which we hit the plugins further down. Now, the first group of effects which are going to affect the signal is the Pro channel. Now, I've got no effects set up in the Pro channel at the moment, and I'm going to skip over it because basically it behaves in exactly the same way as the inserts we have down here in the effects section. And that is to say, it starts off at the top of these inserts and works its way through sequentially. Now, I've got a couple in here at the moment and they're both switched off, but if they were switched on, it would first of all go through this TH3 plugin I have here. This is a amp sim plugin which comes free with Cakewalk, and then it goes through to the Sonatus delay, which is a delay plugin which comes with Cakewalk also. So after it's finished working its way through those insert effects there, it then goes through to the send section. Now, we're not going to cover that now because of course that's the other scenario that we're going to be looking at. So we haven't got any send set up here, so it continues down past the sends, and it'll only be stopped at this point if we have mute selected. Okay, so we're not going to have mute selected, so we can still hear our guitar. And then the next thing that happens, it gets affected by our panning and our fader controls. The fader affects the output volume of this channel. Of course, we can use it to make it quieter and louder, like so. Now, where the signal goes after this depends on what you have set up in the output section. Now, by default, it goes to the master bus, which I've got selected here, and that's where most of you will be sending most of your signals most of the time. Now, the important thing I want to discuss next is the order of these plugins and how that can affect the sound and why you should be considering it. So the order of the inserted plugins can have a really dramatic effect on the sound in many different ways. I'm just going to demonstrate one of those ways to you now because it's really easy to hear. We've got our channel set up here with the two plugins we had earlier, those being TH3, which is a guitar amp sim plugin, and then the Sonatus delay, obviously a delay plugin. So let's start off with the TH3 plugin. I'm going to switch it on and let's have a listen to it when I play the guitar really quietly. A little bit louder. What we're hearing is a pretty clean guitar sound. Now, what happens when I play this guitar really hard? We get an overdriven guitar sound. So this plugin is affected by the input level of the signal it receives. If it receives something quiet, it doesn't do too much to it. The louder it gets, the more it applies that overdrive effect. So quietly, loud, like so. Just like many amplifiers. Now, let's switch that off for a moment and have a look at the second effect we have in this signal chain. This is the Sonatus delay. Now, this is going to play the sound that I play on the guitar, the dry guitar sound, remember, because I've got the amp sim switched off. And then it's going to play it again a number of times. And each time it plays it, it's going to play it more quietly. So I'm just going to do one short stab on the guitar, and then you're going to hear all of the delays getting more quiet, like so. Okay, so now we understand what both of these plugins are doing. What's actually going to happen when we play one stab on the guitar and we do it pretty loud, when I do it pretty hard? Well, first of all, the TH3 plugin is going to overdrive that sound. So we're now going to have the sound of an overdriven guitar. And then we're going to take that overdriven guitar, we're going to apply it to the delay effects plugin, which is going to make the sound of an overdriven guitar gradually more quiet with each repeat. And it's going to sound like this if I play it reasonably hard. That's pretty obvious that that's going to happen, right? You knew that. So what's going to happen if we change the order? What if we put the delay first and then we put the overdriven guitar second, or just, the guitar amp sim second? Well, something different's going to happen. Let's go through logically before we actually demonstrate it. We get a dry guitar sound, which then goes to this sonatus delay. It plays a dry guitar. It's going to start off loud, and then it's going to gradually play a dry guitar more and more quietly with each delay, yeah? That is going to go through to the amp sim, which is at first going to hear a loud guitar and is therefore going to overdrive that signal, but is gradually going to hear a more quiet guitar with each delay. Therefore, it will apply less overdrive on each repeat. So this is going to differ because we're initially going to hear an overdriven guitar and then gradually a more dry guitar. So let's have a listen. So can you hear on the tail of that reverb, it's just not getting quieter, but it's getting less overdriven. Another try again. So that's a really obvious example of the sequence of plugins dramatically changing what actually happens. More common and more subtle examples may be, for example, using EQ. Maybe you're using something like a high pass filter before a compressor. That could really change the way in which the compressor behaves, because it'll actually be receiving a lower signal from the low end when we use high pass. That's just another example. There's many, many examples. So do be mindful of the order of your plugins when you're using inserts. Now for sends, it's quite different. So let's have a look at that. So again, I have a channel set up with this dry virtual electric guitar sound. Of course, it starts off at the top, it goes through the gain control, it goes through the Pro channel, and then it hits the effects section. I've got no effects inserted here at the moment. So at the point where we reach sends here, we still have a dry guitar sound. Sounds like this. Now, I've set up a bus, which I've renamed amp bus, and I've got it sending over to that bus. I'll switch that send on now. So that signal now comes from here and goes through to this new bus, right to the top of it, where again, it goes through its gain controls, it goes through Pro channel, and in this case, it's then hitting effects here with the TH3 plugin inserted there. That is the overdrive plugin, and I've got it set up so it almost overdrives all the time. It's going to overdrive with a reasonably low signal, and let's hear how that now sounds. Now, what you're actually hearing there is a blend of the overdriven sound and the original guitar sound. Now, the reason for that is when the signal goes from the send, it's not rerouting just to the send, it's actually branching off from the send to the bus, okay? The sound itself, the dry guitar sound, is continuing past here and then going ahead through the rest of the channel, through the fader section, and then out to the master. So we are hearing a blend of the two. And that means that when we drag this fader down on the bus, we will gradually hear less and less of that overdriven guitar and just only hear the dry guitar. And blend it back in. Okay, so we can create a blend of the two in that way. Now, I should point out that this bus is outputting as well to the master bus, just as our original track is. So they're getting blended together on the master bus. Now, there's a couple of really important controls with sends, which you really have to understand to fully make use of them. The first is the level control. This is the amount of that dry guitar which gets sent through to that bus. Now, this is very important because remember, the amount of signal which is received by this guitar amp sim plugin affects the way it behaves. The more that gets sent through, the more overdrive we hear. The less that gets sent through, the less overdrive we hear. So this plugin will be affected by this level control. Now, we do change the volume, but that's not the most important thing. It's to do with the amount of signal which is sent through at that point. If we turn this all the way down, there's not much of a signal sent through. And as we bring it up, there's more and more signal sent through to that overdriven guitar effect there. So that's very important. Now, if we want to overdrive it all the time, but make it less loud, then of course we'd use the fader over here, because this happens after this has happened. Really important to understand that. Now, the next control, which is super, super important and often overlooked, is this button here. It's labeled post, and by default in Cakewalk it's switched on. This means that the signal going through here is the post fader signal. What does that mean? The level sent through is affected by how much level we have on the fader. So as we bring this fader down, not only are we lowering the volume of the dry guitar, but we're also lowering the amount of signal which gets sent through. So it's not just going to be changing the volume, but the effect, of course, is that it's going to make this a more dry signal over here as well. So right at the top will be very overdriven, mixed with some dry. But as we bring it down, particularly down here, we're just getting less and less of that overdrive. That's very, very important to understand that that's what's happening there. Okay, well, what if we didn't want that to happen? What if we didn't want the amount of signal to be affected by this fader? Then we just switch this button off. Now, something quite different happens now. Think about it. The dry signal comes down from the top, branches off over here, only depending on the level we have set there. That means if we have this fader all the way down, there's still some signal going through to this bus, and we can still hear that bus. Let's have a listen. So we're now only hearing the overdriven effect of the guitar. We're not hearing the dry sound anymore. That's why this is a really important button, because no matter what we do with this fader, we're still going to hear the guitar. Now, if you wanted to use this as a way of blending the two different types of signal, then what I would suggest is you output the first one to a bus. Let's call it just the guitar bus. And you also then output this effects bus through to that guitar bus. Then you can actually use this as a way of blending them, but on that new bus, you can control the overall volume. By the way, are you finding this video useful? If you are, go ahead and hit the like button for me. Do it right away so that you don't forget. Also, if you do like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you're notified about my other videos. Now, back to this video. So in this example, I've got two sends off to buses. I've got the first one here, which is the amp bus we did earlier. That's the overdriven sound of the guitar. And then I have another send. I'm sending it off to something I've called the delay bus. And that has the sonatus delay inserted there with much the same settings as we had in the earlier examples. So what's going to happen here is that dry guitar signal is going to come down from the top. It's going to then go through to the amp bus. But remember, that dry signal continues down then to the delay bus, okay? And that delay bus is going to set up delays or repeats of that dry signal. So if I play the guitar quickly now, you'll hear that we hear one overdriven guitar and then all of the repeats are dry guitars. And again. And that's because the delay bus there is not receiving the the overdriven sound of the guitar is receiving the dry sound. Now you'll notice in Cakewalk, when you have many sends set up like this, that you can't reorder them, you can't drag them around. And that's because it makes no difference. The sequence makes no difference because they're all receiving whatever the signal was at this point before it reached the sends section. And that is why the order of these buses, the order of these sends is not remotely important. So something I'm commonly doing is adding reverb to vocals. And in this case, I've got a backing vocal track set up here, and I've inserted the sonorous reverb effect so I can get the sound of a massive hall with this vocal. So using the insert method. Now, it's not uncommon to have more than one backing vocal. In fact, I've got another 2 backing vocal tracks here, and I want to make them all sound like they're in the same massive hall. So I've inserted the effects in each channel and I've set them up the same. And you can probably already see the problem here. If I decide, no, I don't want them in a massive hall, I want them in a medium hall, I'm going to have to go into every single plugin and adjust that. That's going to take a lot more time unnecessarily to make them sound all like they're in the same place. Not only that, but I'm using 3 plugins when I could be using 1, because the method I could be using is sending all of these through to a bus where I have that sonorous reverb effect. And if I want to make it sound like a large hall or a medium hall, whatever I want to do, I can go in and just change one plugin. Not only that, but I can change the character of that plugin with other plugins independently of the channels. So for example, something that you may often do before you go into a reverb is to cut out all the low ends so that you don't get lots and lots of rumble. So what you'll want to do there is add in either a low cut plugin or something like an equalizer, which I have here, before the reverb. So in this case with the signal, I'm getting rid of all the low end and then I'm going through to the reverb. And I've done that independently of the original channels. The original sound of the vocals doesn't have the low end taken out of it, only the channel with the reverb. And that's another excellent use of buses. The fact that you can be much more economical is a big thing. You'll use a lot less plugins in your products. You'll put a lot less pressure on your CPU, and you'll save yourself heaps of time, especially when things all have the same character to them. You want them to sound the same or like they're in the same space, for example. That's a good use of plugins in buses. So your considerations are this. Do you want your plugin effects to affect each other? Do you want them running one into the other in a kind of a chain with a compound effect? If that's the case, then inserts are an excellent option. And don't forget, you can use inserts on a bus and center that bus as well. The other consideration you may have is, do you want your effects to affect the original sound independently without affecting each other? That's a great case to use sends off to buses. The other consideration, of course, you have is, do you have a number of channels that all are going to be sounding sonically similar or using a similar effect? That's another great use of sends off to a common bus where you can quickly make changes and you'll put less pressure on your system in terms of CPU usage. Now, don't forget also that you could just do a send from one channel to a single effect or something on a bus, and that can just be a really nice way of blending the original and the affected signal together. And that's just a nice simple way that doesn't really need to have a bus, but it's just a very nice way of doing things. I hope that all makes sense. If you've got any questions whatsoever, please do ask in the comments down below. While you're there, take a look at the description and check out my link to patreon.com, where for as little as $1 per month you can help me help you by making more videos like this. And I'll see you in the next video.